What I'd like to do is I'd like to talk to you about something that I can't stop talking about. And some of you may have heard this lecture before, but there's some new things, and I bet there are a few things that you could learn again. This is my whole focus of attention these days. It's called the Starch Solution. And I just got an agent for a book, which will be probably in a publisher's hands within the next 3 to 6 months. And the book is called the Starch Solution. And everybody I run into, every time I run into them, somebody new, they go, "That's stupid. Why would you call a book the Starch Solution? You know, why would you use such an offensive term, starch?" And in my contract, it says the book will be called the Starch Solution. Yeah, I mean, it's because that's what it is. And I'm going to try and explain to you over the next few minutes why it is the Starch Solution and why we have to get new terminology into our speaking about nutrition. And until you understand this, everything gets hard. Once you understand the Starch Solution, everything becomes easy. And so that's why I think even though you may have heard this lecture before, it's worth you hearing it again. To begin, we all have to agree that we must eat. You have to eat. And the primary reason you eat is because you need energy. I mean, you may think you need protein, you may think you need fat, you may think you need vitamins. But the main reason you eat is to get energy. That other stuff just kind of comes along with it. And you can get energy from 3 sources. You can get it as far as scientific sources of calories, you can get it from fat, carbohydrate, or protein. Generally, the body only burns carbohydrate and fat. Just under desperation, it burns protein. To put this in a broad spectrum of food, what we're talking about is high-fat, high-protein foods are generally animal products, and high-carbohydrate foods are generally plant products. So you have a choice. And if you make the right choice in terms of your source of calories, you'll do well. If you make the wrong choice, you'll do poorly. When I mention starch, this is what people think of. They think of stiffening shirts. Actually, since the 1400s, starch has been used for stiffening things, for making cosmetics, used in dyes and various industrial purposes. Or you think about this when I mention starch. You think about glop, you know, gooey, non-nutritional white bread or some other type of dough when I say starch. And the other thing you think about when I say starch, maybe you don't, but I'm sure all your friends and parents and doctors do, is when I mention starch, the first thing they say is, "Starch? You can't eat starch. Starch makes you fat." I mean, everybody knows that if you eat rice, it turns to sugar, and it'll make you obese, and that's why there are 1.73 billion obese Asians living on starch-based diets. I mean, you got to stop these fools someplace. And I think that's a good place. Next time somebody says to you, "I'm not going to eat starch, I'm not going to eat rice, because it turns to sugar, makes people obese," you got to stop and you got to say, well, why is it then that everybody who lives on starch-based diets is thin? And when they give up their starch-based diets, like move to Los Angeles, they get fat. Why do I call it starch? Because that's the name. That is the name of what I'm talking about, the official scientific name. This is a journal, a very scientific journal. If you're going to publish about the food or industrial uses of starch, then this is where you're going to publish in the journal Starch. I can't call it anything else because that's what the name is. It's starch. Starch. To start at the molecular level, starch is chains of sugar. These are these rings up here that you see. They are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's 6 carbon sugars, 5 carbon chains, and these are simple sugars. And what these simple sugars do is they attach to other simple sugars with linkages that we can digest. So you have a linkage between these 2 ring structures, each one of these being, this is an amylose, a simple sugar, and they attach together. And then we have enzymes that we make in our gut. They can come and break these linkages apart, and these sugars can be absorbed into the body, and then they go into the cells and they provide energy. So you make these chains, and then you put branches off these chains. You get these long branching chains of sugar. And that's what starch is long branching chains of sugar. And then you take these long branching chains of sugar and you collect them in the cells in organelles called amyloplasts. Or a more common term would be starch grains or starch granules. And they float around in the cell. That's what these are. And inside one of these globs here that has a membrane around it are tens of thousands of starch molecules, which are long branching chains of sugar. Now, why are these in the cells, these long branching chains of sugar? Why is this energy in the cell? The energy is in the cell for the plant's purposes. The plant, through the process of photosynthesis, made these sugars, turned them into chains, and put them in these organelles, these amyloplasts, so that it would have energy come springtime to germinate and grow anew. That's why it's there. It's for the plant's purpose. It's stored energy. That's real important to emphasize. This is stored energy that the plant stores for its own uses. We call these starch grains or starch granules or amyloplasts. Now, when I talk of starch in terms of foods, what I'm talking about are foods that contain a lot of starch, a lot of amyloplasts, a lot of long branching chains of sugar. I mean, lots of it. These are storage organs. And these storage organs are, again, used for the plant to germinate and become a new plant after the long, hard winter. And so typical starches, when I'm talking about food, starches would be like sweet potatoes or potatoes or legumes or grains. Legumes and grains being the seeds for the next year to generate. The stored energy in the tuber being the energy that's provided for the plant for the next spring to generate. So these starches are foods that have a lot of this stuff in it. They're storage organs. That's what they are. That's what starches are. Storage organs. These are not starches. Okay, these are green and yellow vegetables. I know there's some potatoes up there, or tomatoes up there that's fruit, but generally what you're looking at is green and yellow vegetables. Now, green and yellow vegetables have starch in them, but not a lot. They're kind of dilute in the amount of starch. There's not a lot of starch in an onion, not a lot of starch in a green pepper. There's some, but you'd be hard-pressed if you were going to get your calorie needs supplied by eating broccoli or cauliflower. I mean, you'd spend all day eating 3 bushel baskets full. So they're not starches. They're green and yellow vegetables because they don't have that concentration of energy that you need to get you through the day. This is not starch. Now, you could probably get through the day eating fruit. There's a lot of carbohydrate, a lot of simple sugar in fruit. And there are people who just eat fruits, and they can do it. There's enough concentrated energy. But this is not long chains of sugars. These are simple sugars that are present in fruits. So fruits are not starch. They don't have the long chains of branching chains of sugar. This is not starch. Okay. There is no starch in any animal at all, ever. There's no starch in chickens or fishes or cows or pigs or eggs. There's no starch. There's no starch in milk. There's sugar in 2 animal foods, and those are milk and honey. But otherwise, there's no sugar in any other animal food that I know of. And the sugars that are present in honey and milk are simple sugars. They're not starches. So there's no starch in any animal food. This is starch. This is starch. That's oatmeal. Yeah, if you don't recognize it, let me know. I'll tell you what it is. This is starch. That's bean soup. I assume the soup we had today was starch. It was lentil. Yeah, that's starch. This is starch. This is starch. There are 3 different kinds of starches, but this is starch. And this is starch. And sweet potatoes, that's starch. And this is starch. Potatoes. Okay. And this is starch. Okay. That's starch. And this is starch. And this is starch. So now when I say that I eat a starch-based diet, you understand what I eat. Some people who hear me talk, they say, well, all he eats is starches, all he eats is potatoes, or all he eats is pasta. That's not true. It's a starch-based diet with fruits and vegetables. It's the diet that we eat and that we teach. But starch is the centerpiece. You need that energy. You need a starch-based diet. I got a little email from somebody a couple of days ago, and this said a lot to me, so I'd just like to take a moment and read it to you. What I love best about your focus on starch in this lecture is that it is much simpler for me to understand than focusing on carbs, proteins, and fats. I know what a starch is. I can recognize that food easily, and I can grow starchy foods in my garden, but how do I grow protein, a carb, or a fat? Those explanations were always too far removed from what I see on my plate. So you need to think in terms of starch, not protein or carbs or fats. You need to think in terms of starch. You are designed as a starch eater. We are seekers of starch. We have on the tip of our tongue taste buds for sweet, for starch. You have no taste bud for protein or amino acids on your tongue. Now your cat does. Your cat has amino-tasting taste buds because your cat is a meat eater. It's a protein meat eater. That's what the cat. I hope you don't try and make your cats vegetarians. Okay. All right. A cat is a protein seeker, and so they have amino acid sensitive taste buds. But we have sweet tasting taste buds because we are seekers of sweet tasting substances, which used to be simply potatoes and rice and corn, and maybe some fruit. Sure, some fruit, and maybe some honey once in a while. But that's what the taste bud was always seeking, were those foods. Of course, nowadays we have industry dumping 150 pounds of sugar into our palate and our tongues. Starches are clean fuel. Starches are very low in fat. 1 to 8% of the calories are fat. They contain absolutely no cholesterol. There's zero cholesterol in any starch or any plant food for that matter. They do not grow human pathogens like E. coli or mad cow or salmonella or listeria. They don't grow these pathogens. They don't grow them because their systems are so different. These pathogens are growing in animals. And the reason we catch these pathogens is we're animals. So if a cow can grow an E. coli, we're close enough in our metabolic makeup or physiology to a cow that E. coli can jump over to us. But we are so distant from plants that plant diseases can't jump over to us. You have no friends with tobacco mosaic virus or Dutch elm disease or aphids. It just doesn't happen. If you, however, find a plant food contaminated with something like E. coli or salmonella, you need to just stop immediately and say, well, who made doo-doo on the plant? Because that's what happened. And it gets national headlines. I mean, what was it, last year? You couldn't even buy tomatoes at Taco Bell because of the salmonella, which they never found out whether it was really on tomatoes or not. But it got national headlines. I mean, it went on for months. Can't eat tomatoes, got salmonella. And the same thing with Adwala apple juice, where they got, the apple fell into the cow dung and got some E. coli from the cow dung and sickened and killed some kids. Went on for years, they're talking about it. They're still talking about that stuff. Whereas almost all infections that are spread to people from food come from animals, comes from milk or pigs or cows. But it gets about that much in the paper and then it disappears. I must believe there's some spin here. I must believe that industry is out there to make you believe nothing's safe to eat. Because these stories about the animal foods don't get hardly any mention at all. But boy, you contaminate one little alfalfa sprout with a little E. coli, you're going to hear about it for months. And stop and remember where that E. coli came from. It doesn't grow in. Okay. The other thing is poisons, chemical poisons. Starches are very low in chemical poisons because these environmental contaminants are fat soluble, so they get sucked up in fat, and of course these are low-fat foods. Now it doesn't mean that starches won't have chemicals with them. They can, but it's because of the farming practice. They spray it on. And in most cases, you can scrub off or peel off the outer layer, which contains most of the chemical contamination. So starches are clean. Starches are nutritionally complete. Starches have loads of protein. 6 to 28% of their calories are protein. You need about 4% of your calories as protein. They contain a proper array of vitamins and minerals. They're loaded with vitamins and minerals. In fact, starches like potatoes and sweet potatoes have all the vitamins and minerals you'll ever need. It has everything except for B12. And grains and legumes, they're missing 2 vitamins. So you can't live on a grain and legume-based diet. They're missing A and C. But you could add a piece of broccoli to your rice, and then you'd have all the A and C you needed. They're full of fiber. They're full of carbohydrates. They're very satisfying. And that's why people call starches comfort foods. Like when I was growing up in Michigan, it was mashed potatoes. That was my comfort food. And then we moved to Hawaii, and it was rice that people called a comfort food. If you're from the South, it could be corn. Someplace, somewhere in your past, or maybe your mother or father's past, there is a comfort food that's a starch. How nutritionally complete are starches? You may have been reading on the internet lately about a guy who's living on only potatoes. Have you read about that? No, not John McDougall. No, there's a potato farmer. Correct my story. I mean, you've read about this on the internet, haven't you? Oh, there's this potato farmer. It's going on right now, who's going to live on nothing but potatoes for the next 60 days, because he's so mad about people maligning the potato. And it's made national headlines. He's just going to eat potatoes for 60 days. Of course, people think he's crazy, but he's not crazy. I mean, this is something that's been done before. It actually was an experiment. And you can find this article, and I encourage you to do it if you just go to Google and you put in Kahn, K-O-N, who's the author. I just did it yesterday, so I know you can pull it up. Just put in Kahn, all potato diet. Come up just like that. It'll be the first article. It's a PDF file. You can read the study. Well worth your trouble. Kahn, K-O-N, then all potato diet. And what Kahn did is, he's the researcher, is he did a study that was published in 1928 on a 25-year-old man and a 28-year-old woman. And these were athletes. These were like really physical people, marathon running type athletes. And he housed them. Believe me, there's probably no ethics board, IRB, that would allow this study to go on. Considering the amount of trouble I had, I'm sure there isn't. But they did a study where they housed these people and they fed them potatoes. That's all they ate was potatoes and a few spices and water. And then they ran into a problem. That is because they were so physically active, they weren't getting enough energy, so they had to add oil to the people's diets. Now, when you add oil, you add no protein, no vitamins, no minerals, no carbohydrate. You just add oil. It's empty calories. And so that diluted out the nutritional value of the potato. Still, you got to get to the end of this paper and read what they say. First of all, they say that people did not tire of their all-potato diet. There was no craving for change. And then they say, even though they were both physically active, they were described as in good health on a diet in which the nitrogen, in other words, the protein, was practically solely derived from the potato. This really shouldn't surprise any of you who study history. You know there have been many times in Western Europe since the 1600s and in South America for at least 13,000 years. There have been many times where whether or not a population of people survived depended upon the potato. The potato supports the worldwide pillars of nutrition it has through all of written history. It's an amazing food. I mean, there are populations in Russia and in Poland, that's all they had was potatoes. All right. Now, I'm going to give you right now the reason that I believe, and I think I can prove to you, that the human being lives on starch, is a starch eater. That our diet, your diet, my diet, is a starch-based diet. The reason is that all large populations of trim, healthy people throughout all verifiable human history have obtained the bulk of their calories from starch. All right, let me make that a little clearer for you. All large populations of trim, healthy people, no exceptions. Throughout all of verifiable human history, this is very important, a history that we can verify by writings or good archaeologic findings, have obtained the bulk of their calories from starch. Barley in the Middle East, for 11,000 years, we've known that's been the basis of their diet. These are recent archaeologic findings that I'm going to be talking about. In a place near the Dead Sea, they found this storage house, 12 foot in diameter. It was the center of the village, and what they found is that this was used to store barley. The Aztecs and the Mayas are known as the people of the corn. Their diet was corn. Yeah, they may have had a couple of human hearts here and there, but it was corn. Millet in Africa for 6,000 years. Rice in Asia for more than 10,000 years. That's been the basis of most of the people's diets in Asia. It's rice. Wheat in the Near East, 10,000 years. It was kind of funny. I once in a while, believe it or not, I get into arguments with people about the things I believe. And I was dealing with the low-carb folks, the Atkins-type people one time. And they pointed out to me why I was wrong about starch and wheat in particular being good for you. And the reason I was wrong is because analyses of the mummies showed that the mummies had severe atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, and other diseases of Western civilization. The mummies did. And so that proves living on a wheat-based diet is bad for you because they got all these diseases. Well, when they analyze the hair of these mummies, they do that. They look at the minerals in the hair of the mummies. What they found is that the mummies lived on a Western diet. They ate, the pheasants and the other animals that they ate back in those times. And, good grief, they're mummies. Who do you think got to be a mummy? The pharaohs and the kings and the queens, the ones that ate all that rich food, they got to be mummies. Yeah. Potatoes in South America, 13,000 years in South America. Potatoes. The Incas, for example, they lived on potatoes until they went to war, and then they changed to quinoa because that was more food of greater strength when they went to battle. Yeah, there's a chuño. How would you pronounce it? Chuño? Yeah. Well, I'm going to tell you what it is. A chuño is it's freeze-dried potatoes. And you can do that in the Andes because in the daytime it's hot. So you can dry the potatoes, and at nighttime it freezes because you're up in the mountains. And so they made freeze-dried potatoes, and they take these freeze-dried potatoes, which you call chuño. That's close enough. And then they take and they put them in dry storage rooms, and they'll last for 10 years. And so when times were tough for the population, that's how they survived, is on freeze-dried potatoes. Yeah. I want you to notice something here. There are six fuels of human civilization. There are 6 foods that have fueled the development of civilization. Civilization, that's what we have, civilization. Primitive people are hunter-gatherers. That's all they do, is just hunt and gather. That's all. They have to spend their whole day hunting and gathering. They don't have time for any other things that civilized people do, like music and art. They don't have time. All they're doing is just hunt and gather, and maybe some evening they have time to draw a little stick drawing on the cave. That's it. So as people became more smarter, more able to control the environment, they would pick some particular plants that they liked and were easy to grow, and they started growing these plants near where they lived, and they got more efficient at getting fuel. And so now not everybody had to hunt and gather. Now some people, because they made more food than one person could eat, they were able to get more food than one person could eat. Some people could do other things, like they could become soldiers and teachers and part of the government and artists and so on. And as people become more efficient, less people had to be dedicated to gathering calories, and more people could do other things. And then it got to the point where they became so efficient that they could take some of that plant food and they could feed it to animals, and they could eat the animals. And those were the kings and queens that did that back in the old days. And then around 150 years ago, we became so good at this with the Industrial Revolution and with the harnessing of fossil fuel that we really were able to just produce so much food, and a large part of the population got to be other things besides hunter and gatherers. And now we're at a point in civilization. This is civilization. We're at a point where one person sitting on a tractor can make enough food for 3,000 people, which leaves 2,999 of us to do something else, which I bet that's everybody in this room. That's civilization. And I want you to notice those 6 fuels that caused us to become civilized. I want you to notice them. They're in yellow up there. They're barley, corn, millet, potatoes, rice, and wheat. What I want you to notice is that 5 of these 6 are grains. And there are a whole bunch of people running around these days telling you grains are bad for you. Do you ever hear that? Grains are bad for you. Yet 5 of the 6 fuels that caused us to develop the civilization we have today are grains. And I also want you to notice that 3 of those are gluten-containing grains. No, 2 of them, 2 of the 6. Wheat and barley. Rye is up there too as a common fuel. And I'm just bringing this up as a question. I don't have the answer for you. I know there are people who have celiac disease. I know there are people who have trouble with gluten. I'm not doubting it. Maybe 1 in 100, maybe 1 in 250 people. But I don't think we got the whole story, especially since gluten-containing grains were a foundation for people's diets for tens of thousands of years. Something else going on with that gluten thing. So archaeologists say that we were hunter-gatherers with the emphasis on hunting. Why do they say that? I mean, they used to say that. Don't say that anymore. But your friends will say, oh, yeah, we're meat eaters. The reason I know we're meat eaters is because our heritage is of hunting and gathering with the emphasis on hunting. And so that's why we should be meat eaters, because that's what our ancestors were. You look at this site, this village that was here 50,000, 150,000, 250,000 years ago, and it proves that we were primarily meat eaters, because when the archaeologists were digging up around the fire pit, all they found was bones and tools to cut animals with. They didn't find any corn kernels or orange peels or... So obviously we were meat eaters, right? Because after 100,000 years, all they found was evidence of people eating meat. Well, of course, that's all they found. But that's old archaeology. That's not new archaeology. New archaeology takes a different point of view, and they find different things. Like, for example, recent publication, 2009, what they found in Mozambique is that's Africa, they found evidence that people were consuming grains, plants and grains. They found it in their village site 105,000 years ago. And how did they find this? Well, when they were digging around in these archaeologic sites, what they found is they found these. You know what these are? They're starch granules. They're grains, starch grains. That's what they found. This is an important excavation. It's 150 miles south of Santiago, Chile. And the reason it's important is this is one of the few sites where organic material was preserved, because it was a peat bog. And so as a result of the peat covering up the remains of the village, organic stuff was found 14,000 years later. This is the first evidence of people eating potatoes. They found 44 edible species of plants at this site and 22 medicinal plant products. This is kind of fun. This is a site that was 8,000 years ago in the western part of Peru. What they found is they found 7 skeletons. And you can see these skeletons. I'll just point them out to you. See the teeth here? Okay, these are teeth of the mandibles of 7 different individuals. And when they looked between their teeth, what they found was these. They found starch granules. And the starch granules are so unique, they could tell what the diet of these peoples were based on the architecture of the starch granule. They found that their diet was squash, beans, peanuts, and grains. Thanks to global warming, we're finding all kinds of new things. Now that the ice is melting, we're finding people who were buried in the ice, like the Iceman. In northern Alps of Italy, this man was discovered, and it was estimated that he was buried in the ice 5,000 years ago. And when they examined him, they found animal foods in his stomach. They found that they had bow and arrow. And so the initial thoughts of the people that were doing the investigation, the initial thought was that, obviously hunter-gatherer, he was doing some hunting. But when they analyzed his hair, what they found is that he was a vegan. Based on hair analysis, his overall diet was almost pure vegetarian. And it was a wheat product that he was consuming back then. I love this one. This is so much fun. You got to go do this. You got to go on Google and find this. It's a recent finding. You'll find a whole, I think it's Time Watch documentary that tells this whole story. And then you'll find also some reports. All you have to do is put in vegan gladiator. That would do it for you. You'll pull this up. This is a finding that they just made, and again, they made a documentary and written a lot about it. They found on the road to Ephesus, right? You've been there? Have you been there? Turkey? There's a whole bunch of Roman stuff there, and Colosseums and stuff like that, right? It was a big gladiator town. And on the road, what they found is they found a 200 square foot plot, grave plot. And they dug it up and they found 60 gladiators. How did they know they were gladiators? Well, because they had trident wounds in their head and they had all the tools of a gladiator buried in this 200 square foot plot. And they started analyzing these gladiators and they looked at their bones, and based on the zinc and strontium and calcium and other minerals in the bones, what they determined was that the gladiators were vegan. Yeah. And that fit in with the historical accounts of gladiators, which identified them as barley men. Their diet was a diet of barley and some beans. Now, why did they eat a diet of barley and beans? Because they wanted to win. That's why they ate it. These are the toughest, fiercest. This has got to have been the deadliest job on the planet, to be a gladiator. And they compared their bones to the people who were buried in grave plots near there, but outside of there, and they concluded their diet was a vegan diet. Now, it's kind of interesting when you read the story or watch the story, you can see the investigators' bias is coming through. What they said is this is the first evidence that proves that gladiators were obese. Because, of course, people who live on starch, barley, must be obese. And they went on and theorized the reason that they were obese is because obese gladiators made a better show. When you cut them, the fat would open up and they would bleed and they wouldn't die. It wouldn't be a mortal wound. You'd have all this blood and stuff. And that's what they say. When you watch the documentary, it's just really kind of well worth watching. And then they say they've analyzed their bones and they found really high bone mineral density. And they couldn't figure out how these people would get such strong bones when they didn't drink any milk. They were in meat. They didn't eat any meat or anything. They lived on barley. And so what they theorized is they lived on burnt wood and bone ash. That's what they said, yeah. Bizarre as can be. Oh, anyway, I thought that was pretty neat. And so I decided I was going to go looking for fat gladiators. So I found a whole bunch of mosaics of gladiators that were done back in their times, 1,800, 2,000 years ago. And I looked around for fat gladiators. I couldn't find any fat gladiators. This guy's big, but he's not obese. I could not find any obese gladiators. But this should have you recall any time that you're talking to macho men at the gym, or your children or husbands, et cetera, who are telling you that they have to take protein supplements and eat lots of meat to be strong and hardy and so on. Point out to them that the strongest, fiercest men in the world were the barley men. They lived on barley, and for a darn good reason. The Roman soldiers, they asked their leaders to take meat out of their diet before they went to battle so that they would have a better chance of winning the war. The greatest conquests that have happened in human history have been accomplished by men primarily that have lived on starch-based diets. For example, Alexander the Great. His men lived on corn, which is not maize. If you read the historical accounts, what corn is, it's various grains. That's what they called grains back in those times, corn, like rice and wheat and barley and so on. And these people living on starch conquered all the known world at that time. And so did Genghis Khan. He did the same thing. Conquered all the known world with soldiers who lived on starch. And even today, our most enduring athletes, those who run marathons and triathlons and these long bicycle races, they carbohydrate load. They live on starch. If you eat meat, what you've done is you've taken in calories that don't support your winning effort. All right. So anyway, that's why I believe that we are starch eaters and the human diet is a diet of starch, because all of human history says so. All recordable history, all verifiable history of all large populations of people. Oh, you say the Eskimos. Oh, I forgot the Eskimos. All large, successful, the Eskimos were very small, very primitive. They were true hunter-gatherers. And they did not live on a starch-based diet. And you will find a couple other exceptions, people that didn't live on starch-based diet, but they're just tiny little populations of people who lived on the extremes of the environment. We're not talking about people who occupied for 800 to 1,300 years Central and South America, like the Aztecs and the Mayans and the Incas did, living on starch-based diets. All right, so anyways, let's just leave that for a minute, because I know some of you are kind of bored by history and you like real good stuff, especially living in Los Angeles. You like to hear about the genes. The O.J. Simpson genes. Genes are everything. And so that's real good science. So let's talk about genes. Let's talk about Domini's work. Domini is a researcher who lives in Santa Cruz, publishes in the major journals, and has done a lot of research on the human diet based on teeth and jaw structure and so on. Has concluded that the human diet is a starch-based diet. But what he's really known for is his study of the human genome, the genetics. All of the genes in the human being are known. Likewise, other animals. We've dissected the genome of various plants and animals, and we know what the genetic structure is, nucleotide by nucleotide. We know what the genetic structure is of these animals and plants are. And so what Domini and his group did is they looked at one particular section of the genome, and that's a section of genes that codes for a particular protein called amylase. They're amylase protein-producing genes. So you have this code of nucleotides that makes a protein called amylase, and amylase's job is to digest starch. That's all it does. It's in the mouth and in the gut. It digests starch, no other purpose. And so what they did is they looked at various primates. And they investigated, found out how many copies of the amylase gene were present in various primates. What they found was lesser primates, or great apes, had 2 copies of the amylase-producing gene in every complete set of DNA material. They found 2 copies. And then they looked at people, and they found on average people had 6 copies and as many as 16 copies of the amylase-producing gene. So your chimpanzee and your gorilla have 2 copies, and the human being has at least 3, 6, 8 times more numbers of copies of this gene. And if you look at the saliva of various primates, you find this also. You find that a human primate has 8 to 12 times as much amylase in their saliva as does a lesser primate, or great ape, gorilla, chimpanzee. Why is this important? Well, lesser primates, they can't digest starch very well, but they are able to digest simple sugars. And so the diet of a great ape is primarily fruit, some perishable vegetables, a few termites, maybe a few rodents here and there. It's primarily fruit and perishable vegetables is what the primate diet is. And because that's their diet, they have to be in a place where that food's available all year long. And where that's available all year long is near the equator. So the lesser primates, the greater apes, the chimpanzees, the gorillas, are confined geographically to the equator where their food is. And they can't move to a region of the world where their food is gone in the fall, winter, and early spring. They just can't do that. So what the story they tell is this, is in the human evolution, the primate evolution to humans, one of the very important things that happened, essential things that happened, is we developed a greater ability to digest starch. To do that, we had to make more amylase, and to do that, we had to have more copies of the amylase-producing gene. Now, what that accomplished for the primate is when we were able to digest starch, we were no longer confined to the equator. Instead, we could leave the equator and migrate north and south and inhabit the entire planet Earth because we had a food supply, and that food supply was storage organs. Like they could dig in the ground and dig up roots of plants, of potatoes and sweet potatoes and other tubers. And they could collect grains in the form of grains, or they could collect seeds in the form of grains and legumes, and they could store them in dry places so they had food in the fall and the winter and the spring. We were able to tap into an unused food source as human beings. So as a result, we migrated and conquered the earth, so to speak. The other thing that Dominique talks about in his paper is the importance of starch in the development of the human brain. Now, I know your friends tell you that the reason we're human beings, we have this big brain, which is 3 times the size of a chimpanzee, is because we eat meat or we eat fish. You've heard it. I know you've heard it. Well, that's not true. I know it's not true, not only because of archaeological findings, but I'm also a doctor, and I know what the brain burns. The human brain burns glucose. Yeah. 20% of our energy every day goes to the brain. And so what Dominique says in his group is that by having this gold mine of energy, we're able to grow this big brain that we have now. All right, Mary and I were in Hawaii. Well, we're going to go to Hawaii next month, take our grandson. Our whole life is centered around our grandchildren. Those of you who are not grandparents, you don't even need to understand. But you will hopefully someday. So anyway, we're going to take our grandson to Hawaii next month. And we were with my son, Craig, the doctor I've been telling you a little bit about. We were there about, it doesn't matter, 10, 15 years ago at a restaurant called John Dominus. Some of those of you who have been to Hawaii know that place. We go to watch all the fish and the surfers and so on. So we're sitting at a table, and this lady walked up to us and with a camera, and she said, "I'd like to take your family's picture. It'll only be $10. I said, "No, thanks." I said, "But will you take a picture of that family over there?" She went over and took a picture of that family for me, came back and sold it to me for $10. I said, God, that was good. These people were Japanese-speaking, first, second generation Japanese people, eating mostly rice and vegetables. She came back, sold me the picture, and I said, "I wonder if I can do this again." I said, "Would you go take a picture of that family over there for me?" And she went over and took a picture of that family and came back and sold it to me for $10. Now, these are third, fourth, et cetera, generation Japanese speaking pidgin English. Well, what happened? What happened in these people? Did they develop new genes? Did they catch a virus? What changed? What changed is they stopped eating starch. They stopped eating rice. Instead, they changed their fuel to meat and dairy and the other stuff that typical Americans eat. So they got fat and sick. You think about this. This always happens. You think about people moving from Africa, strong, hardy, physically beautiful people moving from Africa to LA, and what happens? Or people moving from China or Papua New Guinea, or all kinds of places where they live on starch-based diet. What happens is they lose their immunity to disease and obesity. Prove this to yourself. Just go out to LA International Airport and stand around for a while in the international terminal. You know what I'm talking about. So anyways, how do you make these people on your right that are fat and sick, how do you make them well?
Send them to the McDougall 10-day program.
Thank you very much. Another way to make them well is to do this, is to buy them a one-way ticket to Japan and make them eat rice and vegetables 3 times a day, and give them a little work in the farming village. Would they sometimes get well? Would they sometimes lose weight? Would they most of the time get well and lose weight? Would they always get well and lose weight? Always. I mean, this is so basic. It has to happen. You take some of your black friends who live in Los Angeles, you send them back to the rural villages in Kenya or other parts of Africa where they eat a starch-based diet. What's going to happen? They're going to get trim, healthy, hardy, and strong. It always happens. I don't care what ethnic group you think about. You just go to Costco. You walk through Costco, and you see the Latinos, fat, sick, those speaking English, and they've got grandma and grandpa walking along with them, trim and healthy. Just send them back to a diet of corn, beans, and squash. They'd all get healthy. Anyway, you get my point. When people do switch to a starch-based diet, when the Starch Solution really hits, and it's going to hit, you just can't keep a good idea down. You can't keep the truth hidden. When people understand the reason they're sick and fat, beyond their control, even no matter how much they wish they weren't, when they discover it's just a simple thing, and that is they're getting their calories from the wrong source, then things are going to change. They're going to change dramatically. Within the first year of the Western population switching to a starch-based diet, we're going to prevent more deaths just in the first year from heart disease, type 2 diabetes, multiple sclerosis, cancer, et cetera. More deaths in a year than have been prevented in the last century with all the antibiotics. I'd say statins, but they don't work very well. Heart surgery doesn't work. But if I could think of a few good treatments, I'd mention them. But we are going to just change people's lives. Let me tell you what's happened to a few people I know that have switched to a starch-based diet. This guy was the CFO of Wisconsin, got to be 58 years old, couldn't walk up the stairs. He had such bad chest pain. He was so sick. He was on blood pressure pills and antacids and the obligatory antidepressant. And he had to retire at 58. So he went to the bookstore, and he was looking through the bookstore, and he found face out a book with a smiley guy with an apple in his hand, and he bought it. And he changed his diet, and in 7 months, sorry about that, 7 months, this is what happened to him. And that was many years ago. That's basically the way he looks today. Lost 40 pounds off all his medication, dramatic drops in cholesterol, triglycerides, blood pressure. This guy, he lives in Hawaii, still lives there. I met him 27 years ago. Met him at a potluck dinner. He came, a friend urged him to come and visit us. And he was on 25 medications, weighed 450 pounds, had diabetes, already had his heart stopped once. He was really sick, to say the least. He complained about having to drive a big car because he couldn't fit in a little car. And of course, in Hawaii, a lot of the streets are small streets. And that bothered him. All kinds of things he'd complain about. But the thing that really finally got him to change is he couldn't play with his 2 children. And that upset him so terribly, he decided to change his diet. So he changed his diet 27 years ago, and this is what happened. And this is the way he looks today. Yeah. You can read about all these people, by the way. There are just a few stories I'm going to tell you. You can go to a section on my website called Star McDougallers, and I think there are 85 stories there. Some of them I know some people in this room that just made the switch to a starch-based diet. This lady, she's fun. She was at our last advanced study weekend. Daryl was there. He saw her. I was telling her story, and she stood up. Hey, here I am right here. But this is Phyllis Hafey. Phyllis developed rheumatoid arthritis in 1996. Got so bad in the year 2000, she couldn't walk across the room, so she finally went to see a doctor. Doctor said methotrexate. And she looked it up and decided that it was too risky for her. And so she started looking at the internet. And she came across our website and started our diet in the year 2000. She wrote me an email. She says, you just won't believe this. She says, all my rheumatoid arthritis went away. And I said, well, Phyllis, I believe it. We should tell other people. So let's write up your story as a Star McDougaller. She says, great, good idea. And she writes me back two hours later. And she says, could we use a different name? She said, I own the largest physician management group in Toronto. And if doctors find out that I changed my diet, they'll think I'm kooky and I'll lose some business. So I wrote her back and said, sure, Phyllis, we can change your name. And she's good. She writes me back a couple hours later and she says, could we use another picture? And I said, Phyllis, you're not ready to tell your story. So I said, forget it. I'm glad that we were of help and so on. In 2004, it was July of 2004, Phyllis wrote me a letter and sent me a picture. This is the picture. It's her in front of the Eiffel Tower in Paris. She says, I want you to know I just spent the last 2 weeks with my 2 daughters and my husband walking all over Paris, pain-free. And I did have to go back to my room, and I had a room with a kitchenette, and I made my own food. She says, I want you to tell my story. I want you to use my picture. I don't care what business I lose. So we finally told Phyllis the story. Well, these are typical stories, by the way. You see those ads on Jenny Craig and Weight Watchers. This is the best case scenario. Don't expect these results. You should expect these results. It's a big deal. It's a big change, but with big changes, you should get big results, and this is what happens. It's like sometimes I'll talk to a group of doctors or other professionals. They say, you don't really expect this to work for everybody, do you? And you don't really think there's just one diet for everybody, do you? And I'll ask the group, I'll say, well, okay, doctors, tell me something. How many cigarette smokers have you had quit smoking and not get better? How many? Raise your hand. Nobody raises their hand. Every one of them got better. Okay, how many hardcore drunks have you taken care of who quit the booze who haven't got better? Come on, raise your hand. Okay, my question is, how many people who live off of grease and meat and cheese who switch to a starch-based diet don't get better? You know, nobody, if they ever had the experience, they'd say the same thing. They'd never seen it not happen. This guy's fun. He worked for Attorney General Jerry Brown, not directly, he was very much under him, but he works for the Attorney General's office. Jerry Brown, our new governor. I don't want to get political. But anyway, he worked in that office, and Robert Cross is his name. He's an attorney. He's in Sacramento. I'm sure Daryl's met him. Some of the others that come to our advanced study weekends have met him. He has a great story. This is a picture of him. He's 61 years old, high blood pressure, diabetes, cholesterol, recurrent kidney stones, 250 pounds, cholesterol 294, had indigestion. It wasn't indigestion, it was angina from closed heart arteries. Finally, he got to the cardiologist. The cardiologist did a perfusion scan on him and found he had severe blockages in his arteries. And so, they wanted to do the usual. They wanted to do the cath and the angioplasty. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. So, let's see, January 2008 has the perfusion defects and a cholesterol 294. Here he is in May of 2009. No angina, no medication, cholesterol 160. He's 60 pounds lighter. He goes back, sees his doctors, goes back, sees the cardiologist. The cardiologist says, can't be true. Well, here's a man who's on no medication, normal blood pressure, normal blood values, and 60 pounds lighter, and the doctor has the, whatever to say, this can't be true. It never happens. The guy says, Robert Cross says, it's true. He says, well, your coronary artery disease couldn't reverse itself. So he agreed to another perfusion scan, and the results were just a small defect was left. This is Robert kayaking. He kayaks out in San Francisco Bay now. He's a very active man. So how about environmental impact? Well, 1 billion adults are overweight and 300 million are obese in this world. And fat people cost a lot on the environment. Fat people, I know some of you aren't going to like the next part of the lecture, but what? With what Jeff pays me, I can say what I want. Fat people need more food to support their bodies than do trim people. They eat more animals, more processed food, and it costs more money to move them around. In the jet airplane I flew down here today, there were 76 seats. But if we did it by weight, there could have been 135 people on that plane if they were eating a starch-based diet. Overweight people are very expensive. So we're going to take a big load off the environment. My point is, when we switch people to a starch-based diet, just by solving the obesity problems. We're going to save money when we switch to a starch-based diet just because of the simple calorie exchange. To make 1 calorie of starch, it takes 2 calories to do the farming of fossil fuel. To make 1 calorie of animal food, it takes up to 80 calories of fossil fuel. So you switch to a starch-based, if we switch our calories choice to starch as opposed to animal food, you just increase the fossil fuel availability in that sector of our economy by 40-fold. Food miles. There are a lot of people who want to be locavores. Not that I think that's a bad idea. We want to eat locally from your environment. It's a big push today. But scientific researchers, they published a paper just recently showing the impact of being a locavore. And the impact of the locavore would be a savings in greenhouse gases of 4 to 5%, which compared to switching your diet from animal foods to starch is relatively small. It just accounts for 1 day of a starch-based diet. When you switch to a starch-based diet, you cut global warming gases, you probably heard, by 18%, and there are estimates as high as 52% of greenhouse gases are produced by the livestock industry. So what these researchers said, being a locavore, it's like eating 1 day without meat and dairy, that's all. That's not important. But if you really want to make a difference, you just give up the animal foods. If you look at 1,200 calories of food, to make 1,200 calories of steak creates 14 times more greenhouse gases than 1,200 calories of potatoes. If you read Livestock's Long Shadow, which was published in November of 2006, you all ought to read it. It was a 417-page report from the United Nations. It told us that every area of environmental devastation, deforestation, pollution is predominantly caused by livestock. And so it will make a huge difference in our whole environment, just getting people off the livestock and switching them to a starch-based diet. Oh, you're not going to like this one. I'm scared. You know, we have a problem of national security in this country. When half the people in this country are not eligible for military service because of their physical condition, half the people that are in the military service are overweight. We've got a problem of national security. And people say, well, what do you mean? Well, what I mean is we almost lost World War II to people who lived on starch-based diets. And we did lose Vietnam to people who lived on starch-based diets. Okay, so let's get down to some personal stuff. How about your own life? You know, things are tough. The economy's bad. People are losing their jobs. What can you do as far as a starch-based diet in terms of your own family? Well, Mary and I, we went out in March of 2008, and we went out and calculated how much it would cost to buy 2,500 calories of food from a fast food restaurant. We went to McDonald's, Burger King, Taco Bell, Pizza Hut, etc. We looked at their menu, looked how many calories provided, looked at the costs, everything. We made the calculation. And what we found is on average it costs $14 a day to get 2,500 calories of 2,500 calories of food from a fast food restaurant. And that's a lot of calories, 2,500. You're going to be pretty active to burn 2,500 calories. And then we went to Walmart and Costco and Whole Foods, and we calculated how much it would cost to get 2,500 calories by eating a starch-based diet. It costs $3. So it's a savings of $11 a day per person when you switch to a starch-based diet. You make that 2 people, that's $22. You make it a family of 6, that's $66 a day you save in your personal life by switching to a starch-based diet. And I know some of you they're thinking, well, you didn't include cooking costs, you didn't include sitting in the fast food line in your car with your engine running. Yeah, we didn't include all those things, but this is a pretty darn good estimate of what happens when you switch. And people think that fast food is cheap food these days. That's where they're going to save their money, is they're going to fast food restaurants. And right, probably a lot of people do who used to eat at, the big steakhouses and the fancy restaurants. They used to spend, $100 a day for their food. But the cheap food, fast food, costs you $14 a day for 2,500 calories. You switch to a starch-based diet, you just save $11 a day. That food on the right, that's potatoes and garbanzo beans and some broccoli and so on. That's one of the dishes Mary made. You can tell what the one is on the left?
I can tell what the left is.
Oh. No, that's mashed potatoes. All right, let's get back to the point. I just saved you $11 a day. Now, you multiply that by 365 days, and you just paid for the McDougall 10-day live-in program. The McDougall program is free. And I didn't even talk about all the supplements I'd take away from you, and all the blood pressure and cholesterol pills, and all the time I would save you from spending your hours in the doctor's office in the hospital. You should be throwing money at me. You should be, our 501c3, you should be donating all that extra money to our 501c3 for our research on MS. Last year, September 2009, they put out a new dollar. I used to give these out. Last year I gave a few of them out. I don't do that anymore. Mary says, I can't do that. Nah. This coin right here, this Sacagawea, the famous Indian princess who helped Lewis and Clark to the West Coast, on the head. And on the tail is the story of Native American agriculture. Americans. The diet of Americans was the 3 sisters. The 3 sisters are corn, beans, and squash. That's the American diet. That's the diet that we need to get back to. See the 3 sisters here? Native American. Okay, in 2008, the World Health Organization declared 2008 the International Year of the Potato. Why? Because these people understood that we are in a precarious position as a species. We're in big trouble. And they've looked back through history and they've seen how other populations of people have made it through tough times with the potato. And so they declared the potato the 2008 International Year of the Potato. And what they said is, WHO aims at raising global awareness of the potato's key role in agriculture, the economy, and world food security. It may be the potato that allows the human race, the human species, to survive again. Okay, this is real simple. I mean, this is you don't have to be a doctor or a scientist or a genius to figure this out. This is just one simple thing you have to do, that we have to do, that the whole population has to do, is we have to make one U-turn as far as our source of calories. The world population of people is in big trouble. We have over 1 billion people who are obese. Over 1 billion people on this planet have hypertension. 18 million people a year die of heart disease. Type 2 diabetes, they predict that within 30 years, 30% to 40% of the population will have type 2 diabetes. So on one side of the road, we have the human animal deteriorating right before our eyes. On the other side of that same road, we have the destruction of our planet, environmental destruction. And all we have to do, I mean, at least as a start, I know there's lots of other things that need to be solved. One big major thing we have to do is just make a U-turn as far as our source of calories and start heading in the other direction. And that's what the Starch Solution is about. To save ourselves and to save the planet is we have to make that change. Okay. Thank you. With this pretty picture, this is a picture of my family on the North Shore of Hawaii a couple years ago. And the fellow way in the back, he's my son-in-law, who has brought the greatest joy into our lives with 3 grandsons. And the man on the far right is my oldest son, who I haven't talked to you about. His name is Patrick, and he's a doctor of chemistry. I keep telling him he's got to figure out how to get this fossil fuel thing fixed. I put a lot of pressure on him. And the guy out in front, that's me, out in front. Yeah, I can still beat them. I'm still faster than they are. They're really good. I'm not. All right, I'd be happy to answer. I've got 5 minutes. Yes.
I was listening to the head of nutrition at Harvard a number of years ago, Dr. Willett, is it?
Walter Willett, yeah, sure.
Yes. And he indicated that it was less harmful to eat straight tablespoons of sugar, which has 1 element in it, as opposed to eating a white potato that has 2 elements in it. Eating a white potato would create a lot more of an insulin response than eating straight tablespoons of sugar.
So you heard the question from, and the Walter Willett. There are other people. I mean, there are people that you probably heard speak recently that have told you potatoes are terrible. It causes diabetes and all kinds of things, right? I mean, from what you know, do you think that could possibly be true? From what you know of human history, of people living in the Andes? I'm Irish. The Irish population in 40 years doubled when the potato was introduced into Ireland. I've got 2 books on potatoes. It's just silly. It's just absolute nonsense to say that a potato is worse than eating white sugar. It's insulting. It would be insulting for you, just what you know about human history, about potatoes, etc., for somebody to tell you that. How could that possibly be? I don't know exactly what Walter Willett said. I don't know exactly what other people say, but anybody who says the white potato is bad food, they are ignoring human history. They're ignoring the nutritional tables. They're ignoring Jeff Novick, who wrote a whole paper about how stupid that was.
You'd mentioned that you would recommend getting rid of probably a lot of supplements.
Of supplements?
Of the supplements, and we heard earlier about that perhaps we do need to be taking DHA and vitamin D supplements, and you talked about vitamin D, but where do you recommend we get it, or should or shouldn't we be taking supplements?
I gave a
on
lecture
that?
here a couple of years ago about vitamins. In fact, I think it's on one of the DVDs out there. It's about vitamins. I wrote a newsletter recently that was titled, "Just to be on the safe side, don't take your vitamins." The research is absolutely consistent and solid The last 20 studies that have been published, huge studies, the opinion of the Cochrane Review Committee. I mean, there's a paper that was just published in the American Journal of Epidemiology that's titled Soup du Jour, Vitamins A, B, C, E, and now D, that talk about, we used to believe in antioxidants for heart disease. And then we found out that beta-carotene increased the risk of lung cancer. And we used to believe folate was good for heart disease, and then we found out that people who take folic acid increase the risk of restenosis and heart attacks and cancer. And that's what the major studies show. If you go and read the article and read the studies and you try and find something contradictory, I'll be glad to hear you. That's what studies show. And they talk about in that paper about a study in China on vitamin C that said it wasn't so good. I don't want to go into that. And the E, I think everybody in the vitamin business knows how toxic taking vitamin E is. And now they talk about D, taking D. And in this particular paper, they talk about the increased risk of pancreatic cancer in those who take large amounts of D. When you take vitamin supplements, you create nutritional imbalances. A vitamin, this is like a pill. A banana is, has vitamin A, B, C, D, and phytates and fibers and so on, all in perfect architecture, so you can recognize that as a banana. When you take supplements, you take isolated concentrated nutrients that cause disease. And D is the same. I know you're all excited about D. You get D from sun. That's where you get D from. If you take it as a pill, the benefits as far as reducing the risk of fractures are confined to elderly white women who are invalids. That's the studies. The most recent study that was just published in JAMA, it was published in April of this year, where they gave a large dose of vitamin D supplement to elderly women, and they showed there was a 26% increased risk in fractures compared to placebo. The only vitamin I recommend is B12, and that's a whole other lecture. But I think you should stay away from these things. They're dangerous. They're isolated concentrated nutrients. They're not food. They're pills, and they're proven toxic, deadly. And if you want to read about it, just go to my website, go to Hot Topics, go under supplements, and there are several articles written on D and supplements in general, and all the research is there. And I'd be glad to share the stage with anybody who disagrees, and we'd have a good time. Yeah.
Our Congress just passed a huge health care bill, and in that bill, to my knowledge, there's not one word said about healthy eating or healthy lifestyle. Could you comment on that?
I don't know the Obamacare bill that well. I do know that it has put pressure on employers to take better care of their employees. So even though it's a start, I can see where there's going to be some very positive things coming out of it. So I really don't know it well enough to discuss it. You got to start, at least, I know, I don't want to get into politics here, but you got to at least say that finally somebody stood up to big business. Maybe they didn't do everything that needs to be done, or a lot, but at least they stood up to business, to the healthcare business, to the pharmaceutical businesses.
When it comes to supplementation, at all I've heard over the past weekend, DHA, vitamin B12, certain other things where speakers would say, as I'm opposed to supplementation because in the big picture, our bodies don't recognize it. It seems to have some sort of connection with the things we put in our body and where they come from. How can you explain that there's even any supplement or vitamin or molecule that we need to ingest as a supplement at all if this is some lifestyle regimen or...
Okay, out of your question, I take two questions. One is, why would we need any vitamin like B12 if the starch-based diet is so perfect? Again, that's a whole nother lecture, but basically it comes down to we don't eat naturally anymore. B12 is made by bacteria. We maybe get in too few bacteria, and that's why we have B12 at all, deficiency at all. That's why I recommend a supplement of B12, have for the last 35 years for people. Your thing about DHA is something I'd really like to address. It scares me when people say that you must take in preformed DHA. Scares me because I'm an ocean lover. I've been a scuba diver and a sailor and a windsurfer and an abuser of the ocean back in my younger days, but a lover of the ocean now. And when you say that you have to have preformed DHA, that condemns the sea life even more than it is. When I was a little kid, I started scuba diving and playing around with the ocean when I was a little kid. Since that time and now, 90% of the sea life has been destroyed. And my grandkids aren't going to get to see what I've seen. And when somebody stands up and says you have to have preformed DNA, what they're saying is you must eat fish. That's where preformed DHA comes from. Now, I know microalgae, but that's where you get preformed DHA, is fish. So you're telling everybody that they need to eat fish. So you're condemning the already on the verge of extinction of our oceans. And plus, it's not true. It is not true. You'd have to say to me that every population of people that ever existed in all of human history had a source of preformed DHA. They lived on the ocean. Did every population of people live on the ocean? I don't think so. And if you look at the discussion, I discussed it in my, what did I talk about last? Well, anyways, what it turns out is this, is that human beings can take linoleic acid, alpha-linoleic acid, which is what plants make, and they can convert it into EPA and DHA, and they do it as a small percentage, but it's enough. It's plenty. It's all we ever need. The human being can make this conversion to all we ever need. And adding more adds nothing, except more fat, more pollution to the body, because fish animals are heavily polluted. I know some of you are thinking, well, we have by a special DHA that's been had the environmental contaminants removed. Fine. You're adding a physiologically active drug, DHA and EPA. They're physiologically active chemicals that do things. For one thing, they're fat, so you store it and it makes you fat. For another, these things thin the blood. That's why people take fish oil, to thin the blood so they won't have a heart attack. Well, what happens if you get in an auto accident and you have all that thin blood? And they suppress the immune system. People take these essential fats for arthritis because they suppress the inflammation of the joints. They don't oil the joints. They suppress the inflammation. If you suppress the immune system, you suppress all the immune system. The immune system that fights cancer, the immune system that fights microbes. And there's good evidence that taking these essential fats, these active omega-3 elongated fats, increases your risk of cancer, microbial infections, bleeding. I mean, the evidence is there. And it sure isn't good for the fish.
Thank you very much, John McDougall. Thank you.
Thank you.